Welcome back to Last of the Romans. Every offense, every team, uh, dynasty for Madden 24, and we are in the wild card stage of the playoffs. And here's a look at the playoff picture. Notably, the Green Bay Packers slid into seventh place with that win, or with Arizona's win over the Seahawks. And on the left side, the Chargers ended up in the second seed with the win over Kansas City, who is the sixth seed and plays the Dolphins. Um, so the two teams on bye are the Bengals and the 49ers. So we've got Chargers versus Bills. I don't know, that one could go either way. I kind of expect the Bills to upset the Chargers. We've got Dolphins versus the Chiefs, which could go either way again, but I kind of expect the Chiefs to win there. And Jaguars versus the Ravens. I'm definitely picking the Ravens in that matchup. On the right side, we've got Eagles versus Packers. I'm a Bears fan. You know the answer to this one. Uh, Lions versus Giants. Yeah, I'm going with the Lions for that one. I don't hate the Lions. I actually was kind of rooting for them this year. Saints versus Cowboys. um, it's a tough one. I don't care either way, but I guess the Cowboys have the advantage because they have a much better quarterback. Um, yeah, let's get into the stats. I think I'm gonna go over the standings first, and then get into the stats a bit. So we've got the Bengals with 14 wins and only 3 losses. Let's have a look at their schedule. Oh, I skipped them. So the Bengals, they only lost to the Ravens, the Texans, and the Steelers of all teams. That's a weird one. I think I'm gonna have to look at that one. Pickett was just insane for some reason. Hmm. I'm not gonna get into their schedules so much. I might do that after going through the standings, but I just wanted to see who the Bengals had lost to. So the Ravens 11-6, Browns and Steelers 7-10. Look at the points for the Bengals, 601. That's a lot of points. AFC South was won by the Jaguars. The Colts just barely missing the playoffs. That week 4, whatever it was, tie against the Chiefs where they couldn't win. That really cost the Colts. If the Chiefs had won that game, then it would have been 9-8 for both of these teams. Then I think it would have then gone down to, oh well, okay, so the Jaguars probably would have kept the playoff spot because of divisional record. But yeah, the Texans had a disappointing season. They had a much better season in real life, and yeah, Titans did okay, 7-10, for considering they didn't really have a quarterback for much of the season. Dolphins and Bills tied at 10-7. But look at the points for the Dolphins, only had 367. The Bills had 521. Of course, the defense, I mean, big difference there too. Patriots finished 8-9, Jets 7-10. AFC West has the Chargers at 11-6, and the Chiefs at 10-6 and 1, with that tie being against the Jaguars, as I had mentioned. Jaguars. The Raiders finished 8-9, which is much better than they should have, but they didn't really have McDaniels affecting them. So they finished with 8 wins. Broncos only managed 6 wins. Lions 10-7, Packers 8-9, Bears and Vikings at 6-11. Saints managed to get into the playoffs with 9 wins. Falcons didn't get it for some reason. I'm not sure what. In real life, the tiebreaker is. I thought it was strength of schedule, or that might be draft picks. It's strength of schedule, but yeah, they had the same number of wins as the Packers, but didn't get the wild card. Buccaneers and Panthers at 7-10. Yeah, I didn't realize that Baker Mayfield was so good. So for much of the season, he wasn't rated very well. That's why they ended up with so few wins. Panthers, kind of the opposite story. I didn't realize how bad the Panthers were, so they were kind of rated a bit higher in the beginning of the season, and I had to take them down later. In the NFC East, it's a three-way tie between Eagles, Cowboys, and Giants, all with 11 wins, and the Commanders there at the bottom, 5-12. Probably, yeah, they are going to be the first pick. Yeah, as for the draft, I've said it before, I'm a Bears fan. I'm going to get Caleb Williams on the Bears, no matter what. So it's either going to be a big trade or I'm just going to move the Bears to the first seed. I'm not sure what's going to happen, but something in the end, Bears are getting Caleb Williams. The Commanders are getting Drake May, and probably give the Patriots Jaden Daniels if I can. 49ers here with 13 wins, Seahawks 7-10, and disappointingly missing the playoffs. The Cardinals being the ones that shocked them. Of course, they lost like 6 spots in the draft for that win. So that's maybe a Pyrrhic victory or a Pyrrhic victory that is. Rams 6-11, and yeah, the Bengals were the best team because I didn't have Burrow have any injury to his arm. So yeah, let's get into the stats now. I'll probably go through from the top. So the Bears had Fields with 3,000 yards, 22 touchdowns, 16 interceptions, so 87.5 rating. It wasn't amazing, except for if you add in his rushing yards, he's over 4,000, and he had 8 touchdowns on the ground, 9 fumbles. So Herbert and Roschon and Foreman kind of split the carries. Herbert was the best. Foreman somehow not getting a touchdown despite being really good in short yardage situations. Oh, and then at the end of the season there, I had switched to Velus Jones a little bit because Herbert and Roschon, and I think no, it was Herbert and Roschon were injured, so I converted Velus to a running back and had him take over the duties. And he did alright, 3.8 yards per carry. That's really where he should be in real life too, because he's just not that good at receiver. Mooney was our leading receiver, almost 900 yards, 9 touchdowns. He's really a wide receiver 3 in real life. It should have been DJ Moore leading, but yeah, I just didn't target him as much as Mooney, because Mooney was in the slot, and I tend to use the slot receiver quite a bit. DJ Moore did have 770 yards, 16.4 yards per reception, 5 touchdowns. So he didn't have a bad season, just not as good as real life. Cole Kmet was reliable. Tyler Scott much better than real life. Tanyan, and then Richie James. I don't know how Richie James ended up on the roster. I think he might even be cut by now, but anyways. Nate Davis was not good. In real life, he was actually much better at pass protection. At least not that bad. For defense, Justin Jones was a monster for whatever reason. Ngakwe was decent. Montez Sweat, I don't know how he ended up with so few sacks and tackles for a loss. I think he must have been injured for most of the season because that's just surprising. Let me have a look actually. He had, let's see, I want to look at general. Oh, he did have 884 downs played, 16 games. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure. I can't really explain his lack of production. Brisker with 5 interceptions. That's 10 tackle or deflections for Eddie Jackson. Tremaine forced 3 fumbles. We even had a blocked kick and a couple of defensive touchdowns. Interesting. Brisker played the most downs, and then Eddie Jackson. Our kicker Cairo Santos was not great. Extra points only 83%. He was okay as a for most of the kicking, but yeah, even hit 3 50-yard field goals. He was 3 for 3. Our punter Trenton Gill, who's really awful in real life, actually was decent in the game. It looks like, but he's terrible in real life. We need a new punter for sure. Herbert was the leading kick returner, 2 touchdowns on returns, and Richie James had 2 as well, but one was a punt return. So we can move on to the Bengals, who were insane. Joe Burrow, almost 6,000 yards, and it would have been 6,000 if I hadn't pulled him the last game or two because of just having the #1 seed totally locked and no reason to risk him getting hurt. I put Browning in, and he was great too, almost 400 yards a game. Well, he only played 1 game, so 400 yards in the 1 game that he played. 52 touchdowns for Burrow, 119 rating, completed almost 70% of his passes. Very nice completion percentage, really. 9.6 yards per attempt. Mixon was a 1,000-yard rusher, 12 touchdowns. Chase Brown was in there for a lot of carries because of Mixon being hurt or just as a change of pace back, and he even had 6 touchdowns. So 18 touchdowns on the ground between them. And then Burrow had 132 rushing, 5 fumbles. So Chris Evans existing, 32 attempts and only 92 yards on him. Tyler Boyd. Okay, this is another aberration. Just what? 129 receptions, 1,861 yards, 10 touchdowns for Tyler Boyd. That's insane. I don't know what happened there. Jamar Chase even only had 1,500 yards, but did have more touchdowns, 13, and was better per reception. Boyd didn't have as many yards per reception, but he did have a pretty good run after catch total, 544 yards. Irv Smith somehow with a 1,000-yard season and 13 touchdowns, which is just a fantastic season for a tight end. Even their second string tight end, Drew Sample, had 400 yards and 3 touchdowns. Higgins with 383 yards and 8 touchdowns, which is weird. It's a lot of touchdowns for that many receptions. Chase Brown had 2 touchdowns in the air. Kappa giving up the most sacks. Probably not what happened in real life. For defense, Hendrickson had 31 tackles for a loss, which is really good. Miles Murphy was 17. 15.5 sacks for Hendrickson, 9.5 for Hubbard, 9 for Reeder, 7.5 for Murphy. For interceptions, it was Jordan Battle and Awuzie. Deflections, we had Hilton and Taylor Britt and Jordan Battle up there. Forced fumbles, see, did they block anything? They did not. No safeties either. Just one defensive touchdown. For kicking, Money Mac McPherson, 28 for 36, 77%, not very good, but decent on extra points relative to the league at least, because, man, yeah, we missed a lot. Anyways, he was 2 for 9 on 50-yard plus field goals, so just not hitting the big ones, and that's really what caused his percentage to go down. Brad Robbins was a good punter, it looks like, at least a decent one. And then the Bills, 5,000 yards for Josh Allen, 35 touchdowns, 97 passer rating, 1,235 yards for James Cook, 5 yards per carry, 12 touchdowns. That's a lot better than he did in real life, I'm sure. I didn't actually have Josh Allen running very much. 54 attempts, but only 233 yards and 3 touchdowns. It's just kind of hard to break containment from the pocket, like get through that first level of defense and into the secondary, or the second level at least, the linebacker level, with a quarterback, because as soon as you try to escape the pocket, they come off of their blocks and then they match your speed and tackle you. So it's hard to run with a quarterback. Kincaid having 1,600 yards and 11 touchdowns. I put him in the slot, had him as a big slot. It was obviously incredibly effective. Diggs only having 905 yards, but 8 touchdowns. Shakir, for some reason, having almost 800 yards. Dawson Knox, the other tight end, having almost 700. Well, 650. Gabe Davis with 603, but 9 touchdowns. Spencer Brown and Bates both gave up a ton of sacks. For defense, Von Miller, Greg Rousseau, Leonard Floyd were all good. 14 sacks for Miller and Rousseau, 11 for Ed Oliver. Leonard Floyd only had 5.5. 10 interceptions for Tre'Davious White. 12 deflections for Poyer. Von Miller forced a safety. For kicking, Tyler Bass was one of the best kickers. It looks like 32 for 34, 94% completion, or field goal percentage. Not a great time with the extra points, only 87%, but not the worst. And he hit all 7 of his 50-yard plus attempts. Sam Martin looks like he was a pretty good punter. Only 8 punts in the 20, though. That's a little low, I think. Hardy was one of the best return men. 5 touchdowns in the kick return game. 1 in the punt return. So that's 6 touchdowns on special teams for him. I'm not sure what the record is, but he's got to be up there. Broncos starting Russell Wilson most of the season, and he was just not good. On pace for about 4,000 yards, though, if he had started the rest of the season. Stidham, not great either. For the running game, they had McLaughlin being pretty efficient, but Javonte just being okay. 5 touchdowns, 746 yards. Perrin existed. So did Beatty. Mims was their leading receiver, which is what it should have been in real life, but they just didn't go to him. And Sean Payton even said after the season that was one of their biggest mistakes, was not focusing on Mims more. Troutman with almost 1,000 yards and 9 touchdowns, which is insane. That's another aberration in my opinion. So Sutton with 555 yards, 3 touchdowns. Bourne 514, no touchdowns though. Dolchich 223 yards and 4 touchdowns. For the line, Meinertz was not great. McClinchy, also not great. Tackles for a loss, we had Nick Benito and Zach Allen leading. 18 sacks for well, I guess you could call him Sack Allen after that kind of a season. 18 sacks, man. 10 for Benito. 11 interceptions for Justin Simmons. That's a great season. Singleton forced 3 fumbles. For kicking, Maurer was not good. 75% of his kicks went in. He missed 5. Yeah, he missed, let's see, 2 50-yarders and 2 30-yarders. That's not great. Dixon with the high average. Certainly had a lot of attempts. 18 in the 20. McLaughlin was a decent returner. For the Browns, they mainly started Dorian Thompson-Robinson. I don't want to get into, the reasons for that, but Dorian was DTR is who they ended up with for the season. We're not going to talk about their other quarterback. Skylar Thompson had to come in for a little bit and was awful. Let's see. So Jerome Ford, that is, was the leading rusher. 802 yards, 4 touchdowns. Dorian Thomas-Robinson did have 463 yards on the ground. Pure Strong, 427. He's going to be a good running back, I think, at some point. Nick Chubb only had 334 before getting hurt. That was a terrible injury. I don't know. Kareem Hunt was there. Elijah Moore was the leading receiver. Joku the second. Amari Cooper the third. David Bell with almost 300 yards and a touchdown. Ford had a good amount in the passing game too. Conklin gave up the most sacks, surprisingly. Myles Garrett with 31 tackles for a loss, 16 and a half sacks. In the kicking game, Cade York was not good. Bojorquez, yeah, not great. Jakeem Grant, who I believe had a leg injury early in. Oh yeah, he broke his leg like at the last preseason game, I think it was, and then missed the whole year. But in the game, at least, I left him, and he had a decent time returning. Also, receiving, yeah, he had almost 200 yards, 3 touchdowns. So then moving on to the Buccaneers, we had Baker Mayfield with 27 touchdowns, 4,000 yards, 93.2 rating. Sean Tucker is the leading running back, 1,000-yard season, splitting carries with Rashad White, who was injured part of the season, missed about 4 games. Godwin, the leading receiver, 8 touchdowns, almost 1,000 yards. K. Dotton, almost 900 yards, 6 touchdowns. Mike Evans, 750 yards about, with 6 touchdowns. Godeke was the one that gave up the most sacks. On defense, they had Barrett with 37 tackles for a loss, 14 sacks. Vita Vea, 13 sacks. Kicker McLaughlin was decent. Punter was Camarda. He also had a decent season. Trey Palmer with 5 kick return touchdowns and 1 punt return touchdown, so that's really good. For the Cardinals, they had Murray with almost 3,000 yards, 20 touchdowns, 10 interceptions, 89 rating. Only played 12 games because of injury. I think he was recovering from a ACL injury. And so we had Dobbs in there for a lot of the season. But yeah, Murray came back and didn't have a great year, but they're going to stick with him. Running was James Conner, who was pretty good in real life and in the game. Receiving, Rondale Moore having almost 1,000 yards and 8 touchdowns. That's a stat line only his mom's gonna believe. Trey McBride with 877 yards and 7 touchdowns. Dortch 510, a touchdown. Man, James Conner had like 1,500 all-purpose yards. Paris Johnson with the most sacks given up. Kazir White tackles for a loss was 24, 9.5 sacks for. Yeah, I don't know how to say that guy's name. Fahoko, Villamy Fahoko, something. Anyways, BJ Ajawaller. Okay, I can't say that guy's name either. Yep, MyJ Sanders with 5.5 sacks. BJ with 7.5. Buda Baker 5 interceptions. 17 pass deflections for Buda Baker. That's a great season. Prater was okay. Ariza as a punter though, 4.8 or 48 yards per attempt. That's really good. And his net average isn't bad either. Although that definitely makes it look more average with only being 40.5. Only 13 in the 20, so not really leading there. Dortch was great in the return game, but only 2 touchdowns compared to the other guys that had 6. So then the Chargers, we had Herbert with 4,500 yards. 33 touchdowns, 20 interceptions, 105 rating. So really good season for him. We had Blaine Gabbert in there at the end, and Duggan had to come in for injury for a game, and they both did okay. 1,000-yard season for Eckler. Probably not one that he's extremely happy with, but he was out for 4 games, so you know, he could have had a lot more yards if he had been healthy the whole year. Let's see. So Spiller was the backup and had a great year. Because I don't really believe in Joshua Kelly, and he's kind of awful. But Spiller might be decent. He was really good in college, at least. 7 touchdowns in the game, almost 800 yards. Herbert running for 2 touchdowns. So I think that brings it to 35 touchdowns for Herbert total. Allen almost 1,000 yards, 9 touchdowns. Quentin Johnson, that's not that's not gonna happen in real life. 973 yards and 9 touchdowns. It definitely didn't happen. At least, I nerfed him in the game, but he had an amazing season. He's now like a 74 rating, I think. 855 yards for Mike Williams. Gerald Everett had 733. Austin Eckler had another 430 yards in the passing game, so that brought him kind of close to the 1,500 mark. Zion Johnson gave up the most sacks for defense. We had Boza, of course, leading in tackles for a loss with 31 and 11.5 sacks. I need to make Khalil Mack better because he had a much better season than that in real life. Michael Davis, the leading interceptor. Cameron Dicker, the kicker, not very good. J.K. Scott, decent, pretty decent. Yeah. Darius Davis, kind of okay in the return game, 2 touchdowns at least. Chiefs, we had Mahomes missing 2.5 games. So he had a 4,000-yard season, 34 touchdowns, 117.9 quarterback rating. Aludican was okay in relief. For the run game, Pacheco almost 1,500 yards, 12 touchdowns. McKinnon was pretty good as a change of pace player when healthy. Only played 11 games, so 8.2 yards per carry for McKinnon, which is baffling. Edwards-Hilaire was even decent as a backup and picked up 5 touchdowns. Barely ran it with Mahomes. Travis Kelce with almost 1,200 yards, 7 touchdowns. Sky Moore almost 1,000 yards and 9 touchdowns. But that's a crazy season for Sky Moore. In real life, he cannot run routes. He cannot get open. He can't catch the ball. Yeah, I gotta nerf him. Rashee Rice is the one that should have been in that spot. 744 yards, 3 touchdowns. Hopkins injured, I think. No, he wasn't injured at all during the season, so I don't know why he wasn't turned to more. He's largely used as a decoy, but did get 7 touchdowns. Noah Gray with 6 touchdowns. Huh. Pacheco did have over 1,500 yards all-purpose. Trey Smith and Juwan Taylor being the ones giving up the sacks. Chris Jones, the 36 tackles for a loss. 22 sacks. Karlaftis with 13.5. Amenahu with 12. 6 interceptions for Snead. Kicking game, Butker was atrocious. 68% of his field goals went in. The punting game, Townsend was about average. Return game was kind of bad. Let's see, so then the Colts had Anthony Richardson healthy most of the season. And he was great, almost 30 touchdowns, almost 4,000 yards, 96.8 quarterback rating, just really good. He had an additional 1,500 yards, 1,524 yards on the ground, 8 touchdowns. He was the leading rusher. Jonathan Taylor was injured to start the season, missed about 5 games, and then came back and... Oh, no, he wasn't injured. He was suspended. No, he wasn't suspended either. He was waiting on a new contract, I think it was, in real life. He was sitting out, although he might have been injured too. It was, I think, a bit of both. But in any case, he missed 5 games, almost 882 yards in the games that he did play, 7 touchdowns. Deion Jackson was pretty good in relief. Zach Moss should probably be better if that's all he did, because he was great last year. We had Jelani Woods, Josh Downs receiving pretty well. Jelani Woods is huge. He's 6'7", 253 pounds. He had 10 touchdowns. I don't know if I said that already, but that's pretty great. Braden Smith and Raymond giving up the sacks for defense. 63 tackles for a loss for DeForest Buckner. 18 sacks. Shaquille Leonard had 37 tackles for a loss, 14 sacks. Great defense there. Nick Cross with the interceptions. Matt Gay, terrible kicker, apparently. Rigoberto Sanchez with 21 punts inside the 20, which is really good. The Commanders had Howell, who was awful, so they're definitely going to be looking for a new quarterback. 4,385 yards, though, more than any Bears quarterback has ever thrown. Running, Gibson and Robinson split the running duties. Fournette was in there, too. Receiving game, Curtis Samuel was really good, 1,000-yard season. Definitely think he's a good receiver in real life too, but that's a bit much, I think. Leno and Cosme giving up the sacks, 23 between them. 63 tackles for a loss for Jonathan Allen, that is. 28 sacks. That's just insane. He had all the pressure for this defense. There's nobody else with anywhere close to as much as him. Of course, they did trade Sweat and Chase Young. Their kicking game was decent. Good punting game. Good return game. Cowboys. Yeah, not a great year for Dak Prescott. Definitely could have done better. Pollard was great in the run game. Rico Dowdle, who's probably going to be taking over for him, was pretty good. Yeah, they'll probably let him walk like in real life. CeeDee Lamb, almost 1,000 yards, so makes sense for them. They didn't give up a lot of sacks. 23 sacks for Micah Parsons, 41 tackles for a loss, 14 interceptions, 13 interceptions for Diggs, 14 for Gilmore. That's a really good secondary. Nick Folk was, yeah. So we had Brian Anger in for the beginning of the season. He was obviously just the worst. Then Nick Folk came in and was not great. Anger as a punter was really good. The return game was there. Hold on a second. Alright, moving on to the Dolphins. Tua was hurt for about 5 games, and Mike White had to play. Actually, it looks like 5.5 games for Tua hurt. He was decent in the games that he played. 110.9 passer rating. 68% of his passes completed. Achan, or this dude changed his name. Well, okay, he changed his name once, or maybe twice. But in any case, I had gone through like 3 phases of how to pronounce this guy's name, and I think, is it Achan now or is it Achan? I really don't. I think it's Achan now. But in any case, he had 1,000 yards, 6 touchdowns. Mostert was decent as. Oh, actually, it wasn't decent. 2.9 yards per carry. I don't know what happened to Mostert. 6 touchdowns though. Tyreek 1,000 yards, 10 touchdowns. He was injured for about 5 weeks too, 5.5, 4.5. But anyways, Waddle was the number 2. OJ Howard, Cedric Wilson, Easy, 11 sacks given up for Hunt. On defense, they had Agba and Seiler. I don't know how to pronounce that guy's name. Christian Wilkins as well, getting the tackles for the loss. Agba, 10.5 sacks. Seiler, 9.5. 8 interceptions for Jalen Ramsey. 11 deflections, 15 for Holland. Kicking game, Sanders was awful. Punting game, Bailey was about average. The Eagles, 4,000 yards for Hurts, 37 touchdowns, 106.8 rating. I wonder how that compares to his career. So the most passing yards in his career, most touchdowns. Swift with over 1,000 yards. Devontae Smith with 14 touchdowns. A.J. Brown didn't even get 1,000 yards. 7 touchdowns. Goddard 821. A.J. Brown, I should point out, was injured for like 2.5 games, so. Jurgens, 10 sacks given up. Hassan Reddick, 39 tackles for a loss. 14 sacks, 14 for Sweat as well. Fletcher Cox had 11.5. 11 interceptions for Byard, I think it is. But he got cut in real life. He didn't actually have a very good season. Their kicker was awful. Truly awful, 59%. Punter was okay. Falcons started with Ritter and he did okay, 93.4 passer rating. They turned to Heineke at the last half of the season, last 6 games, to try and get into the playoffs, and they almost did. 98.9 passer rating, 7 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. He was decent. Bijan Robinson was amazing, almost 1,500 yards, 11 touchdowns. Cordero, despite being sat in real life, had a pretty good season in the game. Algier had a much better season in real life. Pitts was incredible. Obviously, he didn't have anywhere near that in real life. Drake London was the number 2. 10 sacks from McGarry. Tackles for a loss was led by Calais Campbell, and sacks by Lorenzo Carter. Youngway wasn't great. Punting game was okay. Good return game for Patterson, 4 touchdowns. For the 49ers, Purdy only managed to start 13 games, but did have 27 touchdowns, 115.3 passer rating. Darnold was really good as a backup. Played in 8 games. McCaffrey was the leading rusher. He was injured for a few games. Mitchell, the backup, did pretty well. 1,000 yards for Ayuk, almost 1,000 for Debo, 21 touchdowns between them, almost 1,000 yards for Kittle. $13 sacks for Spencer Buford? I don't know. 42 tackles for a loss for Chase Young. You shouldn't be that good. 14.5 sacks for Hargrave, 13.5 for Boza. Moody was one of the best kickers in the game and in real life. Wishnowski was pretty good as a punter. Wishnowski might have been the best punter in the league. We'll have to check that at the end. Giants, Daniel Jones was actually really good. Comparatively, 34 touchdowns. Yeah, took a lot of sacks though. Barkley, the leading rusher. Daniel Jones did get a lot done on the ground. Waller, their leading receiver. Wandale, also 1,000 yards. Hollywood only having about 700, but missing 3.5 games. Lewinsky giving up the sacks. Dexter Lawrence, man, 59 tackles for a loss, 22.5 sacks. Kicking game was bad. I've been saying that for like every team. Punting game was 23 punts in the 20. That's actually pretty good. Jaguars, Trevor Lawrence was pretty good, 101.9. I did have 6 games where Beathard had to come in. He was good, 9 for 3, 97.6 passer rating. ETN, the leading rusher. Bigsby, the backup, didn't do much. Snoop Counter, the other backup, also didn't do much. We had Christian Kirk as the leading passer, 16 touchdowns, 1,710 yards. Just an insane season for Christian Kirk. Ridley was good too, 8 touchdowns. Harrison and Scherf giving up the sacks. On defense, Ludekin, the leading tackler. Josh Allen, 24 tackles for a loss, 8 sacks, 11.5 for Hamilton. Kicking game was bad, again. Punting game, decent. Jets had Aaron Rodgers in at the beginning of the season and a little bit at the end, 7 games total. He had 15 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, 114 rating. Zach Wilson was terrible in the games that he played, as you might expect. Breece Hall we leaned on quite a bit with the Jets. Almost 1,500 yards, 10 touchdowns. Dalvin Cook was the backup. Conklin, the leading receiver, although Garrett Wilson had 10 touchdowns. Corey Davis was 7. Becton giving up the most sacks. On defense, they had Quinnen Williams with 46 tackles for a loss and 30 sacks. Oh, man. 30 sacks out of the defensive tackle position. Come on. How are you going to stop that defense? I mean, they're getting to the quarterback every play if you can get interior pressure like that. And they did. 13.5 sacks for Franklin Myers, 12.5 for Johnson the second, 8 for Lawson. They were getting to the quarterback all the time. Kicking game was bad. Morstead, the punter, was pretty good. 19 tackles, or 19 kicks inside the 20. The Lions had a decent year out of Goff. Really good year out of Jahmyr Gibbs, and Montgomery was decent as well as the backup. I think that was partially because he was injured. Well, I guess he was only injured for 2.5 games, but yeah, I had Gibbs as a starter for a lot of the season. The Sun God with a 1,000-yard season, 8 touchdowns. Jameson Williams, 1,000 yards, 12 touchdowns. I didn't have him suspended the first 4 games. I just let him play, so that's why he had such a good year. Laporta almost 1,000 yards. Glasgow 8 sacks given up. Let's see. So defensively, they had Hutchison with 8 sacks. Jack Campbell 5 interceptions from the middle linebacker. The infamous C.J. Gardner-Johnson, who tried to get this modding community shut down. Riley Patterson, terrible. Okay, he wasn't terrible. There's been some really awful kickers so far. Jack Fox actually wasn't that good, even though he is a good punter in real life, I'm pretty sure. Packers, yeah, this is another aberration. I don't know what happened here. 5,512 yards for Jordan Love, 38 touchdowns, 29 interceptions though. That's a lot, and his completion percentage was bad. Passer rating of 83.6. So he actually probably had a better year in real life, but 38 touchdowns is crazy, and 5,512 yards passing is just, I don't understand that. That's something happened there in Green Bay. They put something in his food. Aaron Jones almost 1,000 yards and 11 touchdowns. Receiving, it was Christian Watson, 1,700 yards and 10 touchdowns. Musgrave, almost 1,300 yards and 10 touchdowns. Daubs with over 1,000 yards and 9 touchdowns. Jaden Reed, 700 yards. Yeah, they had some good seasons, especially Christian Watson, though. Ryan and Runyon giving up the sacks, as well as Zach Tom. Defensively, 63 tackles for a loss for Kenny Clark, 16.5 sacks, 8.5 for Gary, 7 for Van Ness, 5 interceptions for Ruby Ford. Their kicking game, awful. There was some bug, I feel like, at the beginning of the season where every time I tried to kick an extra point with the Packers, it just was not working. It shanked every time, and it was right down the middle. I had perfect timing, and it still shanked. It was a weird bug, but it seemed to resolve itself after like the 5th or 6th game. But anyways, Pat O'Donnell, the punter, 17 punts within the 20. That's really the only upside to his punting this season. Nixon, though, as a returner, look at this. 6 touchdowns, 30 yards per punt or kick return. And his punting game, he was pretty good too, 6.8, which is good for the way that with the sliders and Sabo's mod and everything. For the Panthers, 30 touchdowns for Bryce Young, over 4,000 yards. This would be an incredible season for him. 94.3 passer rating. Yep, they're definitely keeping him in the game. The running game was split between Miles Sanders, who had 8 touchdowns, 485 yards for Chuba Hubbard, who will be their starter next season in real life. I'll probably cut Miles Sanders in the game as well and have it be Chuba. But Raheem Blackshear, I gave a lot of carries to because I think he's going to be pretty decent at some point in his career. Thielen, the leading receiver, over 1,000 yards, 5 touchdowns. Hurst, over 1,000 yards, 8 touchdowns. Terrence Marshall, 7 touchdowns. I think he got hurt in real life. I'm not sure what happened. Mingo, 458 yards, 2 touchdowns. So, decent receiving years. Moton, 14 sacks given up. Defensively, they had Burns and Thompson giving them 48 tackles for a loss total. 13 sacks out of Derek Brown, 8 out of Burns. 6 interceptions for Dante Jackson. Kicking game was there. Hecker was decent punting. Blackshear returned kicks pretty well. Moving on to the Patriots, they had Mac Jones a lot of the season, and he was not good. 79.5 rating. They went with Cunningham for about 3 games. He was really good. Zappi was decent when he played. Running game, Stevenson, over 1,000 yards, 7 touchdowns. Ezekiel Elliott, almost 700, 7 touchdowns. Receiving game, Hunter Henry had a 1,000-yard season. Demario Davis, or Douglas, that is, with 867. Judy, who they traded for, 815, 5 touchdowns. Booty, 682. 7 sacks given up for Trenton Riley Reef, not a bad season. 27 tackles for a loss for Judon, 12 sacks, 10.5 for Moore, or Barmore, that is, 8 for Dietrich Wise. 6 interceptions for Peppers. Their kicking game, shockingly good. An actual good kicking game. Good punting game too. Well, okay punting game. For the Raiders, we have Garoppolo throwing for 33 touchdowns, 91.9 quarterback rating. But then getting hurt, and Aiden O'Connell coming in, 98 rating, 4 touchdowns in 3 games. For running, Jacobs was amazing, 10 touchdowns, almost 1,426 yards. They didn't really have a backup. For wide receiver, they had 2,000-yard seasons out of Devontae Adams and Michael Mayer. Myers had 801, Renfro 773, that is. Adams with 13 touchdowns. Alex Bars, that is, gave up 12 sacks. Defensively, Max Crosby, 32 tackles for a loss, 11.5 sacks. 10 for Blyle Nichols. Carlson was a good kicker. AJ Cole was really, really good as a punter. 47.2 yards per kick and 24 punts within the 20. Rams had Stafford, not really playing very well. Kieran Williams not really running very well. Zach Evans as the backup did pretty well. Puka Nacua, 1,000-yard season. Cooper Kupp was only in for 7 games, but still had 719 yards and 7 touchdowns, so he would have had a great season if he was healthy. Shelton and Allen giving up the sacks. 63 tackles for a loss for Aaron Donald, 26.5 sacks. That's a very good season. Their kicker was okay. Their punter, yeah, kind of okay. Decent return game. 2 touchdowns and kick returns. The Ravens, not as good of a season out of Lamar as in real life, I don't think. Derrick Henry, though, 1,000-yard season. They traded for him. He was injured part of the year as well. Chicken Salad, Tariq Cohen, almost 400 yards and a touchdown. Keaton Mitchell was decent. Zay Flowers, over 1,252 yards. Mark Andrews, 8 touchdowns. 10 touchdowns for Isaiah Likely. Just the ultimate touchdown vulture. OA getting 30 tackles for a loss, 11.5 sacks, 10 for Pierce. Tucker was surprisingly bad. Duvernay with 3 special teams touchdowns. The Saints had Carr with 5,000 yards. Kamara over 1,000. He played the whole season. I didn't have him suspended. Jamal Williams okay as a backup. 3,000-yard receivers for receiving. Olave with 1,319, 7 touchdowns, 8 touchdowns for Michael Thomas. Shaheed even had a good season. 18 sacks and 13 sacks given up out of Ruiz and Penning. It's a lot. Defense was Nathan Shepard with 26 tackles for a loss and 11 and a half sacks, sorry. 6 interceptions out of Marshawn Lattimore. Kicking game, again, terrible. Punting game, pretty decent. Good return game with Shaheed, although only 1 touchdown. Seahawks had Geno Smith, not really playing his best. Kenneth Walker and Charbonnet were pretty good in the running game. Lockett and Metcalf, of course, great receivers. 15 sacks for Damian Lewis given up. And their defense wasn't that strong. Good kicking game, though. Just average punting game. 4 touchdowns in their special teams. Steelers' Kenny Pickett was decent. 28 touchdowns is pretty good. It's just the interceptions being 22 and the rating not being that great. Almost 1,000-yard season for Najee, 734 for Jalen Warren, 11 touchdowns between them. 1,000-yard season for Deontay Jackson, who I have heard in real life they're looking to trade. Firemouth with 885 and 7 touchdowns. Calvin Austin, 6 touchdowns for some reason. 13 sacks given up for Dan Moore Jr. 63 tackles for a loss for Cameron Hayward with 11.5 sacks. 12 sacks for TJ Watt with 37 tackles for a loss. Pretty good from that position. 11 sacks for Alex Smith, so they're getting to the quarterback quite a bit. 6.5 for Marvin Leal. I think that's better than real life. Minka Fitzpatrick with 12 interceptions. Kicking game was bad. Punting game was decent. Calvin Austin with 2 special teams touchdowns. Texans had 5,000 yards out of Stroud, 31 touchdowns, and a 94.3 rating. I'm going to see, let me see what his actual stats were. Alright, so I looked and CJ Stroud's rating in real life was 100. 100.8. Well, 100.8. He only had 4,000 yards in real life. Pierce was their leading rusher, although Singletary is, I think, was the Texans' leading rusher. 11 touchdowns out of Pierce in the game. Tank Dell with a 1,500-yard season, 11 touchdowns. Dalton Schultz almost 1,000 yards. Defensively, Will Anderson had 26 tackles for a loss, 13.5 sacks. 11 for Thomas Booker, 8 for Perriman. 4 interceptions for Stingley. Kicking game actually good for Kierborn. Their punter was okay. Titans had Tannehill for part of the season, and he was awful. Will Levis for part of the season, and he was okay. Malik Willis played a bit and wasn't very good. The runner was Derrick Henry, but they traded him, so Ty J came in, 867 yards, 6 touchdowns. Julius Chestnut as the backup. Treylon Burks with 1,428 yards, 7 touchdowns. They had Kadarius Toney, Okonkwo. Didn't really give up a lot of sacks, it looks like. 28 tackles for loss for Simmons, 16.5 sacks, 10 for Gibson, who they got from the Bears, 7 for Harold Landry, 6 interceptions for Amani. Is it Amani or Amari? Hold on. Amani Hooker. Kicking game was okay. Punting game was okay. Vikings had Kirk Cousins until he got hurt. Then they went to Dobbs, and he was not good. Madison, 1,400 yards, 12 touchdowns. This is another aberration, is how great of a season he had compared to real life. Akers was pretty good as his backup. 3,000-yard receivers for the Vikings. Addison, Jefferson, and KJ Osborne. Yeah, Osborne's definitely not getting that. Hawkinson, 732 yards. Blocking, they didn't really give up a lot of sacks. Defensively, Hicks and Nwosu were good. 29 tackles for a loss each. 11.5 sacks for Nwosu. 6 interceptions for Byron Murphy. Good kicking game. Decent punting game. Alright, so to look at the NFL total stats, Burrow led with passing yards, Jordan Love was second, then Stroud, then Allen, then Carr, Herbert, Young, Howell, Jones, Stafford. Looking at touchdowns, it was Burrow, Love, Hurts, Allen, Daniel Jones, Mahomes, Herbert, Garoppolo, Stroud, Lawrence, Young, Goff, Anthony Richardson, Lamar Jackson. Interceptions, Love led. Goff was number 2. Stafford's up there. Geno Smith, Pickett, Howell. Quarterback rating, we had Burrow leading with almost 120. Mahomes at 118, essentially. Purdy number 3. Aaron Rodgers 4. Tua 5. Hurts is 6. Herbert, then Trevor Lawrence, and Allen, Richardson, and finally Lamar Jackson and Stroud. Looking at who was sacked the most, that was Matthew Stafford with 71, 69 for Howell, 66 for Stroud, 66 for Geno. Going to running backs, Anthony Richardson actually led the NFL in rushing, which is crazy. ETN was 2, Bijan Robinson, Breece Hall, Pacheco, Josh Jacobs, Madison, Oddly, Pollard, Barkley, Connor, Gibbs, Cook, Kamara, KW3, Ramondre. Touchdowns, ETN, Gibbs, Kamara. Fumbles, Lamar fumbled the most, Richardson, and then Justin Fields. Broken tackles was Josh Jacobs. Yards after contact, Josh Jacobs. Longest run, Eckler. Receiving was led by Boyd, Christian Watson, Kirk, Kincaid, Dell, Chase, Addison, Burks. Touchdowns, receiving, Christian Kirk, Devonta. Yards after or run after a catch, Boyd led, followed by Burks, and then Kirk. The most sacks was Ruiz, 18. That's given up. Tackles for a loss was a five-way tie between Buckner, Hayward, Kenny Clark, Jonathan Allen, and Aaron Donald. Aaron Donald having the most sacks out of them, but for the field it was Quinnen Williams and then Jonathan Allen. Interceptions was Gilmore and Diggs, both on the Cowboys. Deflections, Buda Baker. Best kicker was Jake Moody or Tyler Bass, I'm not sure which. Best punter was Ariza or Wishnowski. Probably Wishnowski. Best kick returner was Nixon. Yep. Best punt returner, probably Christian McCaffrey because he had 27 attempts, but most touchdowns, nobody had more than one. Alright, well that's the stats for the league. I guess I could look at team stats as well. Bengals 35.5 points. Commanders the worst. Defensively, Jets were getting the most sacks and the Rams. Cowboys with 38 interceptions. That's insane. 38. That's gotta be a record. Alright, well, if there's anything else you want to see, let me know. Otherwise, thanks for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video.